wanted to talk this week, as I said last week, about Purim, which is pertinent to the time of year that we're in, right? What?
It's a week Saturday.
Yeah, he's the producer and the assistant producer.
Okay, you're the best boy.
Get back to you with your own retort.
Thanks so much.
All right, are we better?
He doesn't.
So
he wouldn't know that from us.
So I want to talk about. I'll go to some of the simple parts, but I want to speak a little bit on a deeper level about Purim, and in some things that are a little bit different, so that we can hold our interest, not just as well for those who've heard the story before and know what's going on. But there's an understanding in the Gemara that when the Torah was given on Mount Sinai, on the holiday of Shavuos, it says the Jewish people accepted this Torah. It says that in the story of Purim, that later the Jews accepted the Torah again. Now the Gemara is a little more specific than that, and what it says is that when at Mount Sinai the Jews accepted the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, as being from God, and that they're responsible to do it. And during the story of Esther, they accepted the oral Torah, which is the explanations, the understanding of what the Torah is. Right? It says in the Torah, you should bind it upon your arms. What's it talking about? What does it mean when it says you should bind it upon your arms and wear it as a sign between your eyes? To fill in. So how do you know? That's all it says.
But it doesn't say.
That's all it says in the Torah. It doesn't say what they look like, who wears them, when they wear them, how they wear them,
or
what they're made of. Right.
What it is. Okay.
That's in the oral law. The oral law, the Torah is almost like the notes of the lecture, and the oral law is the lecture.
So the Talmud is an oral law.
The Talmud is the oral law. Okay. So something extraordinary happened beyond the story of Purim at the story of Purim. The story of Purim itself is extraordinary, right? I mean, here you have the most powerful nation in the world, the Persians at this time, had conquered the entire world, 127 countries. The entire known world was under the domain of the Persian king, and the Persian domain under this king had decided that they were going to declare war on the Jews who were then living in all the various countries of Persia, and they were going to kill them, and the Jews did not have the ability to fight back. So they would be wiped out. And nevertheless, we have the whole story of Purim and the miracle, which we'll get into. So that's certainly a big thing. But we also have this concept, there was something even larger that happened. Something extraordinary that happened in a deeper sense. And one of the ways of understanding it is that we know, if we would think about the story back in the first parsha of the Torah that talks about Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava. And we know that what happens is that Adam and Chava are living in the Garden of Eden, and they're living a supernatural life. They don't have to work for a living. There is no death. They will not die. They will live forever. They don't have to take care of themselves. Everything's taken care of. All of their food is provided. They don't have to work. Everything, their whole life is basically contemplating and meditating on their relationship with God and with each other, and taming the world, right? Making the world livable that they were in. And that was it until we have the story of the sin, right, where they ate from this fruit, and the whole thing that happened. Now, if you look closely at the wording in the story, you'll notice that when Chava, Eve, is seduced to take this fruit and to eat from this fruit by a snake, she then takes it to her husband and gets him also to eat it. And there are a number of different things that go on, but to fit our story right now, we're going to say this. And then, if you look closely, you'll notice that human beings have 5 senses. 4 out of 5 of our senses were corrupted. That is, they were used in the sin of Adam and Eve. In other words, it says that Eve tasted the fruit, so that's the sense of taste. She saw it, right? She saw it with her eyes. She took it, and he took it. Adam took it. That's with their feeling, right? They heard the snake. Right. Eve spoke to her husband, and he heard her. He spoke back to her, and he said things that were happening to be incorrect to his wife. So, but nowhere does it have the 5th sense involved, which is the sense of smell. That sense was not used in the sin, right? The Torah tells us exactly what happened, and you just read the words, and you can see the other 4 senses were used. So in a sense, those senses were corrupted. They were used in the perpetuation of this sin, which caused death to enter the world and Adam and Eve to have to leave the Garden of Eden. Right? That's simple Torah. That's right. I'm not telling you anything new. That's written right in the Torah, that they did this sin. They had to leave the Garden of Eden. The world changed, and now the world became the world that we know, right? Basically, because of what happened on that day.
I was informed, maybe it's a different information about it, but it's not sin in the same context as in other
It religions. Is that God told them not to eat this fruit, right. And they ate it.
Right, but I'm just saying if it was the tree of knowledge or something like that, the land is different than the people, so that's what I was wondering about that.
There are a lot of differences, yeah. But on a simple level, that's what happened. Okay. Now, when we look into the Megillah, we come across all these characters in the Megillah of Esther. Right? We have Mordechai, we have Haman, we have Esther, right? We have other people, Achashverosh, there are others, but the three major characters are Mordechai, Esther, and Haman. There's certainly the entire story pivots on the lives of these 3 people. And the Talmud asks a question, many questions, a whole book of Talmud that is called the Talmud of Megillah, and it deals with the story, and it deals with many other laws and ideas to do with Purim, and then other things as well. But among the things that the Talmud does, it asks what almost seems to be an absurd question. It says, for instance, Mordechai, where is he found in the Torah? Of course, Mordechai lived many centuries after the Torah was given. So he would not have been in the Torah physically, right? Mm-hmm. Because the Torah was given and it was closed, so to speak, when the Jews entered Israel. Right. Mordechai's parents weren't even dreamt of at that point. So certainly, what does it mean? Where is Mordechai found in the Torah? It also asks, where is Haman found in the Torah? And where is Esther found in the Torah? Why? It tells us there's a number of reasons. One idea is that we know that all of the past, the present, and the future is in the Torah, and we know that in a sense every person is in the Torah, right? You have to find them and understand who they are, but everyone is in there. So the Talmud wants to prove their point by asking about these 3 people. Where are they in the Torah? Now, it's an odd question, right, to ask this question, because they weren't in the Torah, right, as we see it. So what is it getting at? What is the purpose of this question? And then the answers that they get, what are the purposes of the answers? So here's the answers. We'll begin with Haman. It says, Haman min ha-Torah menayan. Where do you find Haman in the Torah? Haman is Haman in Hebrew. Mm-hmm. And it says, coming from the story of that I just spoke about, with the tree, mm-hmm. right, and the sin, right. It says Hamin ha'etz. They took the fruit from the tree. Hamin ha'etz. Right. Ha'etz is the tree. Hamin is from. Oh. So Hamin, play on words, is Haman. Oh. Same letters. It's not meant the same. No. But it's the same letters, and therefore the Talmud says, there's your answer. Where is he found in the Torah? Hamin ha'etz. He's found in those words. All right. And Esther, min Torah menayan. Where is Esther found in the Torah? So it says in the Megillah, it tells us that Esther had 2 names. Esther's name was Esther, and it was also Hadassah, which is why you find many women named Hadassah also have the name Esther, and vice versa. Many women that you call Esther, if you ask them their full name, they'll often tell you Hadassah. Esther and Hadassah are supposed to be both are the same name. Mm-hmm. Of the same person, but she used both names. So it says that her name has to do with what's found in the Torah of a thing called hadassim. Hadassim are one of the 4 types of natural growth that is used in a lulav, mm-hmm. right? And it is the one that has a fragrance but no taste. It's right. An esrog has a fragrance and a taste. A lulav has no taste and no fragrance. So this has a fragrance and no taste. And so when it says, where is Esther in the Torah, it gives 2 allusions. One is says from Hadassah, which has a fragrance. Another one is later on, God says, it says that the time will come where I will be Hester, Esther Panai. I will hide my hidden face, God says. I will hide my hidden face. And the Jews will sin, and I will hide myself from you. But not only will I hide myself from you, but I will even hide the fact that I'm hidden. I'll be so hidden you won't even know I exist.
Is that what the name means, hidden?
Well, Hester means hidden.
Okay.
So, but her name was also Hadassah, which is a type of vegetation that's found in the Torah that has a fragrance and no smell. Okay? So far we have Haman, which is from the tree. We have Esther, who is a type of vegetation with a fragrance. We now have Mordechai. Where is Mordechai min the Torah minayin? Where is Mordechai found in the Torah? And it says there's a thing called morderor, which is a spice that when we learn about all of the different objects that were used in the Mishkan, the traveling temple, and later in the temple in Jerusalem, one of them is they used to burn incense in order to create a special fragrance. On the one hand, it was supposed to be fragrant to God, but also the people who were in there would smell this fragrance, and it was a very inspiring fragrance. One of the things that was in there was a thing called morderor, a type of spice, among the many spices, the dozens of spices found in it. One of them is this. Morderor is Mordechai, it says. Literally, is it? No, not literal, but the Talmud answers the question this way. So we've got three things, three questions, three answers, find it in the Torah. All three answers are dealing with something that has a fragrance, right? Now, let's put it into context. We said before that the sin of what happened, right, with Adam and Eve, which caused the world to change to the point where things were different. We had to leave the garden. We had, and because of it, death entered the world. There was the idea of women having pain in childbirth. Men had to work for a living. Many different things changed and caused the people, right, to live a different life. The life that we live comes because of this idea. So what happens here is as follows. If we look at the names that the Talmud is asking us, it gives us the names of three people. All three people, they say, are found in the Torah as a fragrance. Right? Not that they're literally a fragrance. We know that. It's a play on words. But the Talmud is teaching us a deep lesson about the story of Purim. And that deep lesson that it's telling us is that the three names of Mordechai, Haman, and Esther all are found in the Torah as a type of a spice.
Right.
And therefore the essence of what were they accomplishing was that they were accomplishing an atonement for the sin of Adam, where all of the various types of senses were used to corrupt the world, right? Seeing and hearing and tasting and touching, right, were all used to corrupt the world, but the fragrance smell was not used. Therefore, that one has not been corrupted. It's on a higher level. How do we know that? You imagine yourself. Fragrances have the ability to do things that are shocking. Like you can walk. I remember this happening to me. You walk into a mall, and somebody walks by me, and they're wearing a perfume, and I'll suddenly have a flashback to my childhood with my mother, because they're wearing a similar perfume to what my mother wore, and I smell this, and I suddenly have a memory that I never had before, that I couldn't remember before, but the fragrance spurs that within my mind, right? It causes something. It causes a very strong feeling that I had no idea, but it came through that fragrance. Another example, so I have an acquaintance who used to own a store at the Promenade. It was Saint Cinnamon's.
Oh yeah.
Right? It made buns, right? Now I can tell you that they didn't really make them there. They didn't make buns. You probably know that.
Yeah.
They didn't make them there.
Right.
They were actually made somewhere else and brought there, very fresh, and they warmed them there. But they didn't make them there at all.
Right.
But when you walked by,
They blow out the smell of the cinnamon.
it smelled like they were baking cinnamon rolls.
Right.
But they weren't baking cinnamon rolls.
I know.
Why was it? Because they created a fragrance in an aerosol can that smelled like baking cinnamon rolls.
Yeah.
That's what it smelled like.
I know, because I smelled potpourri one time. I was going, why does it all smell like cinnamon?
Yeah. So the idea was that you'd smell it and it would cause an effect to you just by smelling it. We see the enormous power of the sense of smell. Sense of smell has no physical attribute to it. I mean, it does scientifically. There's very minute things that cause the fragrance, but in the world that we see, It's not like touching something. It's not like saying something, hearing something. There's absolutely nothing to it. It's a smell that you can't see it, you can't taste it, you can just smell it. It's there and it's gone and it dissipates. But it has an enormous power, right? And
now, with that enormous power, it's interesting to note that it's now been found that there are especially strong connections between the olfactory sense in the human brain and the hippocampus, which is the principal storage of short-term and long-term memory.
So it'll be like I said.
Exactly.
So add to this now that is the idea of the fragrances, of how a fragrance has the ability to transport you, to give you the ability to, like I literally am telling the story that I remember so clearly that as I was sitting down at the mall, I was having a coffee, talking to someone, and that person walked by me, and on my peripheral vision just saw someone, and I smelled that perfume, which must have been 30 years old.
That's an old one.
And yet it reminded me of something that happened in my childhood, and by virtue of that, it caused a memory that I had no recollection of until that moment. And it was a real memory. It was really true, but it had only come out because that fragrance did that to me, right? Fragrance has an enormous amount of power, and the final example I'll give you is as I got from somebody who was selling their house. So everything becomes a business nowadays, and one of them is somebody who will come and they will set your house for you when you want to sell it. That's right. They'll come in and they'll stage it in a way so that it appears to be whatever it is that they want to convey, right? Yeah. One of the things that they will very often suggest to you is when you're having an open house, before you leave, you should melt butter on your stovetop. You should put a pot with some butter in it and melt it. And the smell of the melting butter to the person coming into your house will influence them to see your house as a home rather than a house. And nobody buys a house. Everybody buys a home. And therefore, when they walk in and they smell that, they think about their youth, when they were kids, and butter was very common. And people cooked with butter, and you smelled it. And that smell is a very warm, friendly smell, and people are influenced by it. Here you have subconscious effects on you, right? Sometimes it's conscious, sometimes it's subconscious. So the final result of these are that the power of fragrance is enormous. And based on this concept, it's because fragrance was not corrupted by the first sin in the garden. And therefore, when the Talmud asks us about these three individuals, Mordechai, Haman, and Esther, where are they found in the Torah?
Right.
And then when we know that literally they are not in the Torah,
right?
Philosophically they are, but literally they're not. And the answer is not necessarily a perfect answer, but the answers all have to do with fragrances. So then it's giving us a message that the role of Mordechai and Esther, right, in conflict with Haman, was to rectify and atone for the first sin by using the one sense that was not corrupted by that sin. Right? And that's what that's trying to teach us. Now, this concept that we said earlier, when we spoke about how the Torah tells us, it says in the Talmud that the written law was accepted on Sinai, the oral law was accepted on Purim because of what happened. It says Kiblu v'Kiblu Yehudim, the Jewish people accepted and established, and it means they accepted and established the oral law. This story is telling us how the Jews were able to not only physically get through this war, right, what happened to the story tells you here in the Megillah, but also how they were able to rectify that sin to some extent, so that they were at that point able to accept upon themselves the oral law. So this is a bit of a deeper concept that is found within the story itself, but it's telling us that as the story of Esther is going on, it's multi-layered. There's a simple reading. You can open the book and read it, right, and it makes sense. You can read it as a love story. You can read it as a political intrigue, and they're all true. You can read it as a mystical work, and all of these things are accurate. They're all found in here. Esther herself wrote the Megillah. Right? Queen Esther wrote the Megillah that we have today. It wasn't written by another person. She actually wrote it, and she put within it many deep concepts and ideas that are not evident at first, that you have to delve into it to see, because she was a prophet. She was a person of that stature. She was a great person with great abilities. So we find this in there, and this, what the Talmud's alluding to, is a part of the depth of what the story is really teaching us. Right? Now, to take it further in other veins, we also find many other things are accomplished within this story of what goes on, and many other important things that we learn. So, for instance, I think one of the most significant aspects is you can see how this story is unfolding. The first thing you have to realize when you read Megillah Esther is that the name of God is not found anywhere in Megillah Esther. It's not in there at all. And it's pretty strange that any book of primary Jewish text, that is, a fundamental Jewish text, part of our canon of holy books, right, what we call the Tanakh, would not have the name of God in it. It's very odd. The entire book doesn't have the name of God. When God made this miracle, the people were about to be killed. They prayed to God, but nowhere does it have his name. Right? This is on purpose. Right? The only place you find God's name is through hints, through taking the first letter of different words, adding the words together, coming up with different things, but literally and in a revealed sense, God is going to hide his hidden face. He does so in this book, because there's another important change that goes on at the story of Esther. Up until the story of Esther, when miracles happened, they were clear and apparent. When the sea split, right? When we saw that the sea split, it split, and nobody questioned it. You saw it. It was very apparent. It wasn't. You didn't have to be a believer. You stood there. You saw it happen. When God gave the Torah, you saw this happen. When miracles happened, right, up until this point, they were clear and apparent miracles, and nobody could doubt them. At this point in history, miracles go from being what we call nes nigla, apparent, clear miracles, to nes nistar, which is the same word as Esther, which means a hidden miracle. Miracles become hidden. That is to say, if you want to try to explain them away, you can explain them away. It doesn't mean that they're not miracles. It just means they're done in a way where they are hidden. They're not clear. You have to look for them. This happens at this point in history, which is one of the reasons why we don't find God's name in the book, to tell us that from this point on in history till today, including today, God will do miracles for us regularly, but unless you are looking for them, or unless you understand them as miracles, you will explain them away. The famous joke that they say about this fellow who's got to go to a very important meeting in Midtown Manhattan, and he realizes that it's, parking in Midtown Manhattan is not simple, but it's no problem. He leaves early, and he's going to be there. He's going to show up in front of the place, right, an hour before, have time to park and get into the meeting. But lo and behold, as it is in New York, that traffic is a wreck, and he gets to the place where the meeting is going to be, this big building in Midtown Manhattan, 15 minutes before the meeting, and he hasn't parked. And he's driving around in circles to try to find a parking spot, and he can't find a parking spot, and he realizes he's going to miss this meeting, and it's a very important meeting, and he can't miss it. So he decides he's going to pray, and he prays to God, God, help me find a parking spot. I have to get to this meeting. And if you help me get a parking spot, I'll give 20% of the profit to charity from this meeting, and I'm going to make a lot of money. I just got to get to the meeting. Help me get to the meeting. Then he's driving around, and he's praying, and he's getting more fervent, and it's like 7 minutes before the meeting, 5 minutes before the meeting, he comes around the building one more time, and as he's pulling around to the front of the building, a limousine pulls out, and there's 2 spots right in front of the building. So it's easy for him to get in. He pulls in, and as he's about to park, he says, God, never mind, I took care of it myself. That was that God did a miracle, but he could explain it away. It wasn't a miracle. I'm a self-made man. I take care of myself. I do things on my own. If you're not looking for it, you won't see it. That happens here. And there's an interesting point about this. If you read the Megillah from the beginning to the end, you will very quickly realize that you can explain away everything that happens very easily. You don't see the hand of God until the end. When it's all over and we're looking at it from the end, suddenly you realize looking back, it's like dominoes. That you can now see how the last thing happened because the thing before happened to be this way, and then that happened to be this way, and that had to be this way, going all the way back to the beginning. We'll give you an example. We start, right? You have King Achashverosh. Achashverosh is actually not royalty. Achashverosh married royalty. He married the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, who was the head of the Babylonian Empire, which was the most powerful empire in the world. As that empire was failing and the Persians were taking over, Achashverosh was a Persian, but he was not royalty. He married the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, and he became royalty. And he became the king of the Persian Empire. He decides, what do I have to like deal with this woman, this Vashti, right, the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, right? He's now become so arrogant that he forgets that he's only the king because she's the queen, not the other way around.
Right.
And he decides that he wants to humiliate her, which she's royalty and she won't allow it. So he says, either you do what I want or I'm going to kill you. She doesn't do what he wants, and he kills her. Now he has to find a new queen, right? He has to find a new queen. So he goes through the entire land, and who does he find? The one woman who doesn't want to be the queen, Esther. In fact, the Talmud said that Esther was green. Her skin color was green. Now, as most cases with Medrash, they may be true, but probably not. That's not the purpose of telling us this. There's a lesson to be learned. So there's many lessons we can understand why green specifically, but one thing it's telling us that she was not the most beautiful woman in all of the 127 countries that she lived in, that the king could pick from. And she did not want to be the queen. She was a Jewish woman who was an observant woman who did not want to marry a non-Jewish king and live her life there. So something happens that of all of the women of the world who are lining up for him, he picks her. He goes and he picks her. Then at the same time, she has an uncle. The uncle happens to be sitting outside of the palace, right at the gateway, and he hears some guys who are going to try to kill the king. They want to assassinate the king. So he goes and he hears about it. He goes and tells the king. He saves the king's life. The king's very appreciative, but he doesn't do anything about it. Now this is right in the Megillah. I'm not telling you anything that's not literally in the words. The king doesn't do anything about it. He forgets. He's the king, right? He's not. You definitely don't have the idea this guy is a brilliant leader, right? And he forgets, even though he appreciates what Mordecai did. He forgets and doesn't do anything. Along comes Haman, who is a scheming fellow who has a lot of abilities and talent and rises up in civil service and becomes a great leader among the non-royal people within the king's court. And the king recognizes him and realizes that this man can make me rich, can increase. Remember, the treasury of the country is the king's personal bank account. Right? He's the king. He's not the president. The money of the country is his. So he knows that Haman can help him with the finances and be able to increase things. But Haman happens to hate the Jews. Why? Because the same fellow Mordecai who saved the life of the king, who's an observant Jew, won't bow down to him. Because Haman considers himself like a god. Mordecai said, I only worship one God. I don't bow down to other gods. So he wouldn't. Haman takes this as an insult. He's humiliated by him and wants to kill him. Besides, he's going to kill him. He's going to kill all the Jews. That way, nobody can say it's personal. He's going to get rid of them all. He goes to the king, right, and he offers the king an enormous sum of money in order to be able to do this, right, to kill the Jews. The king, who's interested in Haman in the first place because of money, says, what do I care? Okay, give me the money. You can kill the Jews. Right? Suddenly, the king can't go to sleep. One night comes, he can't fall asleep. He's laying in bed, tossing and turning, so he tells one of his assistants, hey, go get me my book, my history book of my life. I want to read it. Makes me tired. I'll fall asleep. He starts reading it, and he realizes that this fellow Mordecai, right, he forgot to give him something for saving his life. And he says, I have to show my appreciation. I want people to do this. I want people to tell me if something bad's going to happen. So I want everyone to know that I appreciate him. And he therefore goes and he honors Mordecai. How does he do it? He calls his most trusted assistant, Haman, and he says, listen, I need you to go put on the king's clothes. Get the king's clothes. Get the king's crown. Get the king's horse. And I want you... And Haman now thinks, I'm going to get all this. Right? He's honoring me because I'm going to give him all this money. No. Go get Mordecai the Jew. and lead him through the city and say, this is what the king does to honor people who help him. Right now, Haman is very upset because he wants to kill Mordecai. And now he's got to walk through the street and do this. Right? I'm skipping a lot, but I'm showing you the story, how it flows. Right? As this is going on, right, Mordecai, of course, comes on the understanding that Haman has made a deal with the king to kill the Jews. And he goes to Esther, who is the queen, one of many queens living in the harem. And he says, listen, Esther, the king is letting this guy Haman kill all of us. You got to do something. And she says, what do you mean I got to do? Who am I? I mean, all right, I'm the queen, but if I go see the king without being called, he'll kill me. The king doesn't just let a woman from the harem come to his bedroom. You have to be called. I wasn't called. He'll kill me if I go. So Mordecai says to her in a very important line in the Megillah, you can go or you cannot go. God will save the Jews. If you go, you will be a part of it. If not, you and every remnant of your memory will be gone, but the Jews will still be saved. It's up to you. And that's what he tells her. He's not cursing her. He's telling her a reality. That you have this opportunity. You have the ability. Right? You have doubts. Okay, go and do it. So she goes, as we know, and she does it. She calls a party, and she has Haman come to the party with the king. And Haman thinks that it's that they're making a party in his honor because he's a very arrogant fellow. And in the end, the king says, "Okay, Esther, what's the party about?" And he says, "Because somebody wants to kill the Jews." So the king says, "What? How can they do that? What's going on?" And it's Haman who wants to do it, right? And suddenly now, like the story is changing, and the king now, who realizes Mordecai is a Jew, calls in Mordecai and Esther, who now he realizes the two are related, and they tell him exactly what Haman's plan is, and the king says the Jews can defend themselves, then they can fight back, and he gives them his ring to be able to prove it, and we know the rest of the story is the Jews are saved, right? So it sounds very logical. It happened to be that the queen died. It happened to be Esther was chosen, and it happened to be that she had an uncle who happened to be sitting at the entrance to the palace, who happened to hear this happen, and that somebody went to kill the king, who happened to see the king and tell him, and the king forgot to do anything. Happenstance. Then he suddenly, right, and then his whole story goes on. He happens to remember just at the right time. Esther happens to be the queen, who happens to call him to a party, and Haman comes, and on and on and on. When you get to the last chapter, it's suddenly realized that God, through in a hidden way, has manipulated all of these things that happen to save the Jews. Not in an obvious way as it would have been previously, where that God would have just come in and the Jews would have woken up and Haman and all of his followers are dead. They just wake up in the morning and they're gone. That's what it would have been before. But now it's hidden. That's why Esther's name is Esther, not just Hadassah. Because Esther means hidden. That from this point in history, God will hide himself and he will not be clear. He will not be apparent. This is the story. In fact, in Jewish law, there's a very interesting law that teaches us the same lesson. Jewish law says only three places in the entire Shulchan Aruch, the entire Code of Jewish law, it says the following statement. It says, if you read the following item, right, book of liturgy of some sort, backwards, you have not fulfilled the mitzvah. So what is it? There's three different places. One place it says, if you read the Shema backwards, you do not fulfill the Shema. It says another place, if you read Hallel, that we say on holidays, backwards, you have not fulfilled Hallel. And the third one is, if you read the book of Esther backwards, you have not fulfilled reading the book of Esther. So immediately people say, well, of course it's gibberish, you read it backwards. You haven't done anything. That's not what it means. If you're talking about Shema, it means you read the third paragraph, then the second paragraph, and then the first paragraph. In order, with regular words, with sentences are fine, right? You have a very good meaning, but the third paragraph before the second and the second before the first, that's called backwards. With Hallel, it's not reading the paragraphs backwards. It's starting with the last paragraph and reading it normally and going back to the first one. And with the Megillah, it's not reading the words backwards. It starts with chapter 10, then chapter 9, then chapter 8, going back to chapter 1. You're reading it backwards. So why does it tell us in these three cases that if you read it backwards, you haven't done the mitzvah? For our conversation, I'm not going to talk about the Megillah, but I can answer all three. But the Megillah is as follows. If you read the Megillah forwards, it sounds like it's a coincidence. It just happened to be Esther was in the right place. It happened to be her uncle was Mordecai. It happened to be the king was going to be assassinated. It happened to be that Mordecai came. It happened to be the king couldn't sleep that night. Right, on and on and on, and it happened. Just coincidence. This is how it happened. It just happened that way. Just like we think in our own lives, it just happened. Right? You have a car accident, and you walk away, and you say, "That's unbelievable." Yeah, it happens.
But this is reading from
you go to a doctor,
beginning to end.
Right. You go to a doctor, and the doctor says, this man is not going to live a week. And then, after he's alive a week, you say, "Doctor, but I thought he was going to live a week." Oh. I don't know. These things happen sometimes. Sometimes people live longer. We don't know why. Sometimes it happens. They won't use the word miracle. That it was a miracle. That God did something. He intervened somehow. Why? Because it's not apparent. It's hidden. That's what you have when you read the story of the Megillah in order from the beginning, from the days of Achashverosh till the end, right? It looks like it's a coincidence. When you read it backwards, however, the first thing you see is the amazing miracle that happens. Then you start seeing how it all fell in place by reading it backwards. Right? You see, the king couldn't sleep at night, and so he wants to reward Mordecai. What happened to be that Mordecai was worthy of a reward. And it happened to be that Haman, right, is going backwards. Now it all falls into place. Now it's obvious. Now you see you see the miracle God did, right? In fact, this is found in the Torah itself. Moshe says to God, show me your ways. Right? Show me. God, I want to see you. In other words, what he wants to do is he wants to understand God. Show me how the world runs. And God says back to him, no man can see me and live. So Moshe's not happy with that. So God says, here's what I'm going to do for you, Moshe. You're an extraordinary person. Go up on this mountain, and on the mountain there's a walkway, that you can go up the mountain. There's a crevice. Go into the crevice and face forward, and I will run by you. And as I run by you, you can look and see me. So the Talmud says in Moshe, now this is again, may or may not be literally the case, but it's teaching us something. Then the story certainly may not be illustrated this way. It may be. So Moshe is standing in the crevice, and it says in the Torah that he feels a wind go by him, and he comes out and he looks. And that's right. Now the Talmud says he saw the knot on the back of God's tefillin. That God was wearing tefillin, and then the back of his tefillin, the back here, that's what he saw, because God ran by him. He went out and looked, and he saw the back of God as he's running away. So what is it telling us? What's the message here? What does it mean? Right? Because God doesn't literally wear tefillin. God doesn't literally have a body. We know that's forbidden for us to even think of such a thing. So what is it telling us? It's telling us the following. No man can understand God as it's happening. And no man can understand God before it happens. But with enough hindsight, you can understand. You can look back on history and tell me why something happened. But you can't look back on the Holocaust, for instance, and tell me why it happened. It's too recent. That's still present day. And remember, Judaism's really old. It's been around a long time. For us, I can tell you why the first temple was destroyed. I can tell you why the second temple was destroyed. I can't tell you why the Holocaust happened. And when the second temple was being destroyed, they couldn't tell you why it was being destroyed. They didn't necessarily know. The prophet may tell them, but without a prophet, they wouldn't know, because it was happening then. Right? We have the ability to have hindsight. We can look back into the past, and we can see the hand of God doing things that you can't see when it's happening. That ability is what the Megillah is telling us. If you read the Megillah backwards, you'll see the hand of God very clearly. Right? But if you read it backwards, you're missing the message. It's like you didn't read it at all. The message is that from this point on in history, including today, in 2014, when God does things for us, you are not going to see it clearly. It's going to be hidden. Yeah?
Are you sort of contemplating that in hindsight down the road you can see that when you were talking about the fragrances being, that everything is hidden, is there a repetition of the hidden?
Not necessarily.
No, you know what I mean.
Repeating the errors.
I'm not saying repeating history.
It could be, but that's not what that's not my point.
Okay.
It might be true, but that's not the point. Okay. So we're learning now another important lesson, which is that the Megillah is teaching us that God's relationship with us is that He does miracles for us all the time. But if we're not looking for them, we won't see them. And if we want to explain them away, we can explain them away. If we want to say it's science, we want to say it's nature, we want to say it's coincidence, we want to say these things just happen sometimes. Sometimes we think people are going to die. They don't die. It just happens, right? That you can say that, or you can say it was a miracle. You can say God intervened. Right? In the ancient times, it was clear that God intervened. It was clear. You had no other way of explaining it. That's why there's a medrash that says that when the Red Sea split, water split in every body of water around the world. If you were drinking tea in England, the water in the teacup split. If you're taking a bath in North America, your water in your bathtub split. Right? Now, again, I don't necessarily believe that the Medrash is telling us that that literally happened. You know what it's telling us? That it was such an enormous miracle when it happened that the whole world heard about it as if it happened right there. Right? Remember, back then, it's not like you had internet. If something happened in the desert outside of Egypt, it's not something you'd necessarily hear about on the other side of the world. But this was so enormous that everybody heard about it. Right? Why? Because it was a miracle that you couldn't explain away. There's no way to explain that the Red Sea split right at the right moment. You can come up with a scientific brouhaha if you want, but the fact is it did it at the right moment, and it closed at the right moment. Right? So that idea was evident to the whole world. Today, the whole world doesn't see miracles, and we ourselves don't see them. We have to look for them. That's one of the messages of the Megillah. It's teaching us that we need to also be able to see, right, and to look for these ideas in the Megillah. I mean, in the life that we live. So there's a couple of the deeper concepts that we find in it. Now, you'll notice that we have two rabbinic holidays, really, in Judaism. Two major rabbinic holidays. You know, Purim. And what's the other one? Anyone know? It's Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the other one. There's a rabbinic, not in the Torah. Right? They both happen the same time of year, in the winter. Right? When it's, I don't have to tell you, right, what it's like out here. Right? It's winter time. Why is that? The winter time is a time that we understand is a time that is more prone for the Jewish philosophy. In other words, we govern ourselves by the moon. The moon is our calendar, right? What's around longer in a 24-hour period, the sun or the moon in the winter? The moon, right?
Yeah.
The nights are longer. Right? It's the time where, right, when people go outside, do they uncover themselves or cover themselves? In the winter, they cover themselves. In the summer, they uncover themselves. Right? There's more of a sense of modesty, even if it's not for the purpose of modesty. There's more of this going on. The Talmud says the purpose of nights being long is so that you can learn Torah. You can use more hours to learn Torah. Because you can't go work in the field in the dark, right? They didn't have light back then, so you had to sit in the house with a candle and you learned Torah. You had more time for it, because it was a time that we know that, in Kabbalistic terms, it's a better time for the Jews. The miracles of Hanukkah and Purim happened at this time of year, when the nights were longer, the days were shorter. So the nights are symbolic of our times. This is an important concept for when these miracles would happen. Both the story of Hanukkah and the story of Purim were both in this time of year. We continue with it that Purim itself, right, is a holiday that reinforces with us the importance of the mitzvahs between people. That why is it why do we know that the story happened? Why is it that Haman had the power to try to destroy the Jews? Like, what happened? What did the Jews do? So there are many examples. One of them is Ahasuerus threw this big party. Right? It says in the beginning he was the king, so he threw a party. He threw a party for half a year, and everyone in the country came, and anything you wanted was there. So if you were Jewish, you wanted Glock kosher, fine. You want Hasidic kosher, you got it. You want this type of kosher, you got it. You want Glock kosher, you got it. You want Sephardic, anything you want. Everybody who came, no matter what your nationality was, you were a part of the king of Persia. He made sure that you could come to this party, and the Jews came. And it says that the king came out wearing the clothes of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. The Jews, because Persia, right, had taken over from Babylon. Babylon had destroyed the first temple, and they say they took all the items from the temple. He came out wearing it. Nobody did anything about it. Why? Because the king of Persia was celebrating not only his being king, but that the Jews were not going back. The temple's not going to be rebuilt. It's finished. Game over. The Jews sinned. They're now under my domain. And the fact that the Jews didn't make a ruckus, didn't get upset about the fact that they were eating out of the pots and pans from the temple, and that the king was wearing the clothes of the Kohen Gadol, didn't bother them, didn't upset them, was one of the reasons that this whole story happened, that the Jews were to be punished like this. Another one of them is that it says that when Haman says there is a nation who is mefuzar u'mefared ben ha'amim, that is spread out and split up among the nations. Right? We have all of these, right? 127 countries were made up the Persian Empire. There were Jews in every one of those 127 countries. So he's saying there are Jews who are split up and separated throughout all of your kingdom, right? All these people are there, and they're a negative force. So Haman wants to kill them, right? But he's sending a message, and Haman doesn't realize what he's saying. He's saying the Jews are mefuzar u'mefared. They are split up and divided among your kingdom. The Jews are fighting with each other. The Jews are not united. If the Jews are not united and they're not getting along with each other, then God is saying there's a problem. The Jews are going to be attacked. Haman is going to kill you because you are not united with each other. You don't care for each other. You're fighting with each other. So therefore, all of the mitzvahs of Purim have to do with uniting people. Like, what are the mitzvahs? Mitzvah 1, you have to send gifts of food to your friends, the people. Right? As I wrote in our halacha of the week, it's preferable to send it to people who don't get. But you're supposed to take two types of food and send it as a gift to other friends. What does that do? It causes friendship. Right? Yeah, someone comes to your house and they bring you, candy or a bottle of wine, and right, it's very nice. People are giving each other gifts. Everybody's happy. Second thing is you have a mitzvah to make sure that the poor get money. Now, those on my mailing list know I do an appeal this year for people in our neighborhood who do not have enough money to live, and we raise money for them, and it's a mitzvah of Purim that you're required, and on Purim you have to give money to the poor. So I collect it and I give it out on Purim. And the reason is so that the poor can celebrate Purim. A poor person, right, can celebrate Purim. In fact, the Rambam says if you celebrate a holiday and you don't have poor people at your table, you are not celebrating the holiday. You're filling your stomach. That's all you're doing. Poor people at your table is what turns it from a meeting of ingesting food to a meal, to a happy meal, a festive meal. So therefore, the next thing we have to do is make sure everybody can celebrate. What does that do? That unites us. Right? All the mitzvahs of Purim are to unite us. Why? Because the reason that it happened was because we were disseparate and fighting. By uniting us into one, right, Esther understood that that was the idea. This is how it was going to happen. So she said, we all have to get together and do these. And Esther writes it. It's written right in the Megillah that you have to send gifts, one friend to another, and you have to give money to the poor so they should be able to also live. And so we see from this that the importance of combating what Haman didn't even realize what he was saying, that the reason of the story of Esther happening where the Jews could be killed was because the Jews were fighting each other. They weren't getting along. And if we can unite them, they'll be very powerful. So the story of Esther in the end unites the Jews. Right? That's what happens. It says Kiblu. All of the Jewish people accepted upon themselves as a nation, one thing, and this brings our story full circle as to exactly what the goal was of what happens. Esther, being a prophet, saw this as it was happening. The sages of the time were not sure that she was correct. They forced it to wait a number of years after the story ended before it became clear to them that Esther was right. And they took this book that she wrote, they made it a part of our basic book of knowledge that we have. And there's amazing things found in this book. Yeah?
Esther was a prophet.
Yeah.
And she knew this was going to happen. Why do you think she hesitated somewhat when Mordechai told her, listen, you better do something here, you better speak up on our behalf?
Because she didn't think she was the one who could do it. Think about what was life. We're not talking about a Jewish woman living in a Jewish society. This is a Jewish woman living in a non-Jewish society. Her husband is the king. There is no punishment for him to kill people. He can kill you, and nothing will happen, right? He tells her, if you come to my castle without my calling you, I will kill you. So is she going to be able to save the Jews? She goes to the castle, what's going to happen? Right? So she tells this to Mordecai. So Mordecai says, look, you can think that the world is going to be run by cause and effect. You go there, he'll kill you. You can think that's the case, but I'm telling you, God will save the Jews. That's a miracle. You can be the one who causes the miracle through your hands, or you will be a victim of collateral damage in this case. You will be gone. Right? That's why. It's not that she didn't know that there had to be something, but she didn't think it would come through her. And then when Mordecai tells her, she accepts it upon herself, and she does it. That's why it says that, if you see that, it says that she went and she dressed in royalty, right? Literally, it means she put on the clothes of the queen, right? But in our understanding, it means she acquired prophecy. At that moment, she became prophetic, and she saw what she had to do. So she tells all of her assistants, you have to fast. They fast for her, and then she goes and does it, and she accomplishes it. That's really how the story worked. Yeah.
Would you say Purim is something like a Halloween in a way?
No, it's not at all like Halloween. Halloween is a time that is extremely negative, that has to do with pagan ideas of evil and good fighting in the world.
Yeah.
And that evil has power and good has power. We don't believe in such a thing. Only good has power in this world. God is the only power we have. It's the only power in the world. There is no other power but God. And Halloween is a continuation of the pagan belief that the dead come back and can harm people at certain times. We don't accept paganism. It's false. It's evil. It's destructive. So there is no similarity between the two.
Like for Purim, like you can get dressed up like a clown or...
You can, because part of Purim is the absurdity of life. One of the expressions in the Megillah is that everything was turned upside down. Everything was reversed. V'nisapachu, it says. Everything that was up went down, right? Everything turned around. The idea being that in the world that we live in, who should have won that war? The Persian, 127 people in an army, 127 countries that had armies that stood up to kill the Jews, or the Jews? Who should have won? The Jews should have lost terribly. They should have been destroyed. They weren't, right? Everything is upside down. Everything's absurd. It's backwards, right? We don't see God, but God's there. It doesn't look like God's doing a miracle, but He did a miracle. We see that the Jews are outnumbered, outmanned, outweaponed, and nevertheless they won. Right? That's absurdity. So it says on Purim we celebrate the absurdity of life. That we, this nation of Jews, are never going to be destroyed. That our goal is to bring the world to completion, to bring it up to where it can become something, and the world can recognize God through our actions, through us. That's absurd. It's absurd. We live in a world that's dog eat dog. We live in a world where power rules, money rules, right? Strength rules, not ethics, not a little group of these guys with beards that smell like herring. That's not who rules the world, right? But the fact is that is who rules the world. That's why it seems absurd. So on Purim, we exhibit this absurdity because the whole story of Purim shows the absurdity, right? Everything being backwards. So men dress like women, women dress like men. We show the world that we're wearing a mask because you think the world is running itself. It's science. It's just nature. It's not. It's God has a mask on. He's hiding from you, right? So I'm wearing a mask, right? Symbolizing that idea. So that's where it comes from. It's a very positive time, not a negative time at all. Right? It's every aspect of the holiday of Purim has to do with the idea of uniting each other and showing the absurdity of the world. When we actually think that the world is right, that the way the world runs is correct, it's not. It's not true. In the end, might does not make right. In the end, the Jewish people will be able to lead the world to completion. It will be that the ethics, that living an ethical life is ultimately the right way to live. Right, and that it will prove to be the right way, right? And the story of Purim teaches us that, and that's why it's so extraordinary, and it's such a loved holiday because it's a holiday that teaches this lesson. Yes.
Isn't there a close analogy with the other rabbinic holiday, Hanukkah? Because there the Jews were disparate, Secondly, the Orthodox, or the observant Jews, rose up against the Jews that had adopted the Greek way of life.
Right.
And thirdly, the Jews were not supposed to be successful. They defeated the Jews that had abandoned Judaism, even though they were outnumbered.
And the entire Syrian Greek
and then
army.
they defeated the entire
Syrian army.
Right.
Greek army.
Right, and they had a miracle that was a clear and apparent miracle. Right? There's a little bit of oil. That's the symbol of the oil that was for one day burnt for 8 days. That tells you, right, that's a clear miracle. You cannot tell me that you can, if I would give you that oil, that you could scientifically explain how that happened. Right? That was before Purim. Right? Because before Purim, miracles are apparent. After Purim, they're hidden. And it's an important message for us. It's the last holiday of Jewish history, Purim. It's the last one. Right? Everything changes with them. Right? Everything is different now with Purim. Things become very, very different, and we follow it. But Purim and Hanukkah teach us how a Jew lives in the world that we're living in. We're not living in Israel anymore like we were. We don't have the Jewish Commonwealth. We don't have the temple. Right? How do we live in this outside world? So we live with, actually Esther was first before Hanukkah, but the story of Esther, right, is teaching us the change in history and how things actually were different. That's why we have a book of Esther with prophecy, and there is no real book for Hanukkah. Yeah.
They say that the temple in Israel is eventually going to be rebuilt. Hopefully.
Yeah, it will be.
So what's going to happen?
It's a number of talks of its own that really explain it, and much of it we don't know. There are very contradictory statements by various authorities, but we can say with total faith and belief and understanding that the third temple will be rebuilt. It will happen again. Exactly what it's like, exactly what happens, if there's sacrifices. Not sacrifices, an argument, but it will happen. That's going to happen.
Well, but we don't know when.
Well, we don't know when, but we can influence when. It's up to us when, how we act. If we act correctly, it will happen sooner. If we don't, we'll continue to wait, as we have for the last 2,000 years.